Today's daf is Menachos daf Nun Hey. We are 8 lines from the top of daf Nun Hey Amid Aleph. So the topic of yesterday's daf was a discussion whenever you have a halacha regarding a shear. Do you look at the shear k'moishein or do you look at the shear lik'moishein? Do I assess it based on what I have in front of me right now, or do I assess it based on what it had previously been? So if something expanded or if something shrunk, do I look at it in its expanded or shrunken state, or do I look at it in what its previous state was? And as we saw, the Gemara sort of spanned the globe in terms of ramifications, lahalacha, where this shaila would play itself out. It began with Menachos, which of course is the topic du jour. We're learning Masechtas Menachos right now. And there was a shaila regarding the halacha of kmitza, which can't be chaser, it can't be yaser. What happens if you mixed a little bit of water together with the soilas? How would that impact the shear of the kmitza? We went from there to a Mishnah in Masechtas Uktzin, which discussed the halacha that in order for oichel to contract tumah, it would have to be the shear of a beya. So it wouldn't be enough if it was a kazayas, which ordinarily is considered the shear chashuv when you're dealing with food. Over here it would have to be a little bit bigger. It would have to be a beya. But again, when did you assess the shear beya? And then finally the Gemara discussed it in the context of the halachas of truma, meiser, and trumas meiser. In that context, the Gemara discussed what would be if somebody was toirem figs, and he was being toirem from some of his figs on behalf of the other figs. The issue is that some of the figs were in their original pristine state, others were already oisgeklapt, oisgehakt. And the question is it okay to be toirem from te'enim on groigers and from groigers onto te'enim? And the Gemara discussed it in light of this halacha of k'moishein lik'moishein. Today's daf begins on that note, albeit from another angle. Tana Rabbanan tarmin te'enim al hagroigros. It's okay for a person to take te'enim, figs, and use that as truma on behalf of his groigers, which are pressed figs, but only b'makom sharagilan lases te'enim groigers. It's only okay to do that if you live in a place where it's customary to make groigers from te'enim. Meaning what people usually do with te'enim is they will convert it into groigers. If it's customary in this place to do that, then the thought is that it's going to be easy to find people to do the work on your behalf. Thus, we know that the ta'enim will eventually become groigers. That's what makes us halacha okay. We'll see what the explanation of that is in a minute. Like groigers, I'll tell you that it's not okay to be ta'enim groigers on ta'enim. Va'afilu b'makom sheragilim lases ta'enim groigers. Even if you live in a place where the minhag again is to make from ta'enim groigers. So an interesting halacha. Yesterday we looked at it more from the technical standpoint. How exactly should you be ta'enim from groigers? Ta'enim groigers, mida, mishko, minyan, k'moishein, lik'moishein. Today the Gemara introduces a brisa that says it's not even so simple in the first place to ever be Torah from groigers on te'enim. In fact, says the brisa, you could be Torah from te'enim onto groigers, but only b'makom sheregilim lasos te'enim groigers. It's not okay to be Torah from groigers on te'enim. Afilu b'makom sheregilim lasos te'enim on groigers. So before the Gemara explains the brisa, two things. Number one, there's an idea, as we'll see soon, when it comes to meiser and truma, and specifically trumas meiser, which by the way is what this brisa is discussing. So it's discussing the Levi who already got meiser rishon. Now he has an obligation to take from his meiser rishon and give meiser minha meiser, what the Torah refers to as trumas meiser. But regardless, there's an idea likatchila that when you're going to give trumas meiser, that it should be min hamufchar. You should do it by and yafa. You should take the best, the choicest of your produce, and that's what the Levi should go and give over to the kohen. From that standpoint, it would make sense to give te'enim versus groigers, because te'enim is considered more chashuv. It's considered more choice than is the groigers. On the flip side, there's also an idea that when you're giving the kohen truma, or again, in this case, trumas meiser, you should give him a davar hamaskayim, something that has a longer shelf life, that has a later expiration date. And groigers are preserved longer than te'enim. Te'enim, you're going to have to convert them into groigers if you're going to want them to be around. Otherwise, eventually they're going to go bad. And that's one of the reasons they would take te'enim and make them groigers. Like this, they had a shelf life. Otherwise, it's like fruit. It spoils eventually. So there's a milah to give te'enim because Te'enim is considered mufchar. There's also a mila to give groigros, because groigros is a davar on the sky. So with that backdrop, the Gemara analyzes this price. It's okay to be Teirim Te'enim on groigros. It's the same min. One is in the form of Te'enim, the other one is already in the form of groigros, but only in a place where it's ruggle, where you'll be able to find people to take the Tainim and make it into Gregors. So the Gemara makes the obvious thing. It's very clear on the Brisa that the only time you can be turned from Tainim to Gregors is if you're going to be able to find someone to take the Tainim and hack them to where they're going to be Gregors. If there are Kohanim present in this shtetl where you're being Tairim, you're Chumas Meiser, Makam Sheini Ragla Ma'ilai, then what's the issue? For Tanam, we learned in the Mishnah, Makam Sheesh Koyin Tairim and Ayafa. Then it makes sense, just give the Tainim to the Koyin. You'll be able to be Yoitza, the halacha of giving Min Hayafa, giving from the choices, which is the Tainim. You worried that the Tainim are going to go bad? What's the issue? Give it to the Koyin, lead it. What's the problem? Ela Pshita, says the Gemara. It's obvious. The only way to make sense of this halacha in the Brisa is the leka kayin. Oh, there was no kayin. Being that there's no kayin, even though ordinarily you would want to give to Einim because it's min hayafa, but you don't have a kayin to give it to right now. And if you're going to wait until you find the kayin, it's not going to be min hayafa anymore. To the contrary, it's going to spoil. Thus, it would be more lekatchila to give groigros, which is the davar hamiskayim. Stating that, says the Brisa, you could be teirim and teinim ala groigros as long as it's a makom sheregilim lasos groigros, because then we're comfortable that you're going to find somebody to pay to make from your Tain and Groigris, thus the Trumas Meiser will not go bad, and it's for that reason it's okay. In other words, the Gemara is making an Aikimta in order to understand the first line of the Brisa. The Aikimta is, we're dealing with someone who is a Levi, he's being Tayrim Trumas Meiser, and there's no Kayan present for him to give the Trumas Meiser to. The Gemara that's true. How do you understand the Sefer? The Sefer said, "V'loy groigros ala te'enim." Va'afilu b'makom sheraga lasses te'enim groigros. It's never okay to be te'enim groigros on te'enim. Freit to Gemara. What do you mean? If like a kohen, if there's a kohen, I understand why there's halacha not to give groigros ala te'enim, because te'enim is the yafa. That's the mufcher. That's the choices, and there's an idea that you're supposed to give from the choices. But if we made an akimta already in the first line of the brisa that we're discussing a makom like a kohen, then how do you understand the second line of the Brisa? Why no groigros al te'enim? Just the opposite. If there's no kohen, then the rule changes. Then you don't give an ayafa. Then you give an amiskayim. You give what's going to last the longest. Oh, so the second line of the Brisa is probably discussing where there is a kohen. Freik the Gemara, Reisha the leka kohen, Seifa the ikka kohen. Does it make sense? One Brisa, two lines, and two aikimtas. The Gemara says in Reisha the Leka Koyin, Sefer the Ikka Koyin. The Reisha, the first line of the Brisa, is talking about where there was no Koyin. The Sefer is talking about where there was a Koyin. Amar Rav Papa. So Rav Papa heard this discussion and he made a general comment. He said, Shema mina, I can take out of here, in addition to the halacha itself, can you be tiring from figs to gehakta figs, vice versa? There is a Koyin, there's no Koyin. But says Rav Papa, I can walk away with a macro, fundamental principle in how you are supposed to be mefarish prices. Rav Papa was an Amayra. Amayram were in the business of explaining prices. So Rav Papa said, I can walk away from this discussion with something very, very important, and that is dachkinon umakminon masnisim betray taimi v'loy makminon betray tanoi. That if you have two choices how to explain a brisa, choice A would be you'd make an akimta in the brisa that Rav Papa referred to as a doichik, dachkinon. Reisha is the leka koyin, Seifa is the ikka koyin. Or there's another way you could do this. You could say the entire brisa is talking about the same thing. One aikimta, but you're going to make the brisa aliba de trei tanoi. Says Rav Papa, it's clear from this discussion that it's better to make a aikimta in the Reisha and an aikimta in the Seifa. Dachkinan umaikmina betrei taimi v'loy maikmina betrei tanai. One thing is clear. Rav Papa obviously had another way to explain this brisa, and Rav Papa felt that if it was okay to be mefarish this brisa aliba de trei tanai, you would not have had to make the aikimta that the Reisha is the leka koyin and the Seifa is the ikka koyin. Now, this is not really the sugya that we're learning right now, so we don't have to digress from the Gemara's digression and really explain what that means. But if you take a look at Tosfos, it's a one-line Tosfos. Dibra masko v'loy mukmina betrei tanoi. What would that
that I came to have been, says Tosfos, that really the entire Bryce is talking about there was no Kohen. V'reisha Rabbanon, v'seifa Rabbi Yehuda, the Polagad Rabbanon, beperik Sheni the Mesechtes Trumis, v'kamar la'olam Torah min hayaf. There is a Shitas Rabbi Yehuda that argues with the Rabbanon. Either way, Rav Papa had a way to explain the entire Bryce of the Leka Kohen, and the Reisha and the Seifa are two Tanaim. One is the Rabbanon, the other is Rabbi Yehuda. Clearly, Rav Papa said it's better to be dachkinan or moikminan masisa betray taimi v'loy moikminan betray tanoi. So before we go weiter and completely shift gears and change topics, just one ara. So one of the yesodis that was mavur in this Gemara is that it's better for a Levi that's giving Trumas Meiser to give Menayafa. So if there's a Kohen in front of him, he's giving his Trumas Meiser, and he can give either Te'enim or Groigers. Same thing, they're both figs. But a Te'ena is a nice fig that you just washed, and it's a full. The Groigers are already pressed. It's better to give the Te'ena than to give the Groigers. What's the reason for it? Because the Te'enim is considered Mufcher, it's considered Men Hayafa, and the Gemara says that B'mokim sheyesh Kohen, the idea is you're always supposed to give Men HaMufcher. In fact, if there's a Kohen, you're not allowed to give Men HaGroigers, because it's not okay. You have to give Men HaMufcher. The truth is that this idea is a pasuk in the Torah. It's a mefurish pasuk in the Torah. It's tucked away. It's at the end of Parashas Korach. So everybody knows the beginning of Parashas Korach, but not everybody knows the end of Parashas Korach. And the end of Parashas Korach, after Aharon's Kahuna Gedolah is challenged by Korach V'Adasai, so Hashem reinstates Aharon as being the Kohen Gadol, and you have a little bit of a chazar of what you have in Parashas Shmini. Aharon, HaKohen, his sons, his family, his yichus ultimately are going to be the Kehanim of Klal Yisrael, and you have the whole parasha of the Matnas Kuna. So the Chaf Daled Matnas Kuna, where are they in the Torah? They're not in Sefer Vayikra and Torah's Kayanim, but they're rather in Sefer Bamidbar. It's in the end of Parashas Korach. The very last Parsha of Parshas Korach, literally the end of Shvi and Mafter, talks about Trumas Meiser, what we've been discussing. Haidaber Hashem Moshe Lema. Velat Leviim Tedaber. You should go to the Leviim and tell them as follows: Ki sikhu meis bnei Yisrael sa Meiser, asher nasati lemiita benachal aschem. When they get their Meiser, Yid gives the Levi Meiser Rishon, v'harim moisem mimenu Trumas Hashem, Meiser min ha-Meiser. So they have an obligation to take Meiser min ha-Meiser, which is also referred to as Trumas Hashem, which is also referred to as Trumas Meiser. V'nechshav lochem Trumaschem kadoga min ha-goyrim v'chamleim min ha-Yaakov. And you should tell the Leviim that when they give their Trumas Meiser, they're going to get the same schar that the Yid gets when he gives Meiser Rishon. So the Leviim had a chelik in the mitzvah of Meiser as well. How so? They're on the receiving end of the Meiser. Where do they contribute in the mitzvah of Meiser? The answer is they give Meiser min ha-Meiser, and that's what the pasuk says. V'nechshav lachem trumaschem, which, by the way, the Gemara throughout Shas learns out so much lumdus from the words v'nechshav lachem trumaschem, that truma can be chal b'machshava, but ein mikra yotzei midei pshuta. What the pasuk saying is that Hashem says that the Levi will have a chelek in the mitzvah of Meiser. How so? By giving his Meiser min ha-Meiser. And then the pasuk continues and says, "Kain tarimu gamatim trumas Hashem mikol maser yisechem asher dikchom eis bnei Yisrael nasatim mimenu trumas Hashem la'aron hakohen mikol matno yisechem tarimu as kol trumas Hashem mikol chelboy es mikdashoy mimenu." And tell the Levim that when they give Trumas Meiser, they should take it from their chelev. Mikol chelboy. So what does mikol chelboy mean? Zokt Targum Unkelis mikol matonosechoin tarfashun yos kol afroshuso dashem mikol shufrei yos makdashem minei. Chelboy is shufrei. Take from the choices, and that's what they're supposed to give. So this mitzvah that the Levi was supposed to give his Trumas Meiser from the Yafa, it's a pasuk in the Torah. The Torah says mikol chelboy, and all you have to do is shnai mikveh targum to know that chelboy means shufrei. And then the pasuk continues, and the pasuk says v'amarta aleim, etc. Last pasuk in Parashas Korach, v'lo yisisu olav chet. If they will follow everything I just said, they will not do an aveira. B'harimchem es chelboy mimenu v'eskochi b'nei Yisrael lo'isachalulu v'lo'isamusu. Now, Pashup Pshat, what the pasuk is saying in the end is that if the Levi will follow everything I just said, he's going to give Trumas Meiser v'lo'isisrael of chet. Then he doesn't have to worry about any aveiras that he may be carrying. But clearly, if he won't give Trumas Meiser, it's going to be a very big deal. Meaning, a Levi not giving Trumas Meiser is the equivalent of a Yisrael not giving Meiser at all. If a Yisrael doesn't give Meiser and he eats his tfuah, it's tevel, misa b'dei shamayim. It's very, very terrible. If
and Meiser. If a Levi doesn't give Trumas Meiser, it has the same exact halacha. It's going to be a big deal. Thus, if he's going to follow what I just prescribed him, it's only then v'lo yisisu olav chet. But the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs, quoting the Sifri, makes another diuk in the pasuk. The pasuk says v'lo yisisu olav chet b'harimchem eschel by mimeno. The Torah has it over in this pasuk, the pasuk that emphasizes the terrible avera that the Levi will do if he doesn't give Trumas Meiser. In that pasuk, the Torah has it over that when the Levi gives Trumas Meiser, it has to be es kol chel by mimenu. He has to give from the choices. Says the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs, mitzvah kuf chav tes. Oid remez. You see a remez in this pasuk. Shehem chayten, that the Levi is a chayte, em lo yoitziu min hatoiv. Even if he gives Trumas Meiser, but if he doesn't give Menah Yafa, he doesn't take the choices, he gives Guroi Gurois, he doesn't give Te'enim. Not only is it not Likatchila, but v'lo yisisu olav chet. He's going to be noisei a chet. He's going to have to walk around carrying aver on his places, because the v'lo yisisu olav chet is only if he gives Trumas Meiser, but b'harimchem eschel by mimenu, and if he gives it from the choices. So if he's going to give from the gregors and not from the te'enim, not only is it not likatchila, but the Torah is very, very graphic. And that's all going, says the Rambam, not only on a Levi that doesn't give Trumas Meiser at all, but even on a Levi that gives Trumas Meiser, but he doesn't give it Menachel. Now the truth is that this idea that you're supposed to give Trumas Meiser, the Levi is, from the Chalev, it's a pasuk in the Torah, it's the sugya that we're learning, but really it's something that permeates other areas of halacha as well. And the truth is, the Rambam, B'Lashoinei Hazav, the very end of Hilchos Yisurim Mizbeach, this is a Rambam that we've spoken out and we've learned together in the past many times. The Rambam brings it up beautifully. The context over there is actually Menachos. And the Rambam is discussing what type of oils were allowed to be used for Menachos. And the truth is, all oils can be used for Menachos. It says the Rambam, being that it's okay to use any oil for Menachos. Lama nimnu. So why did the Torah say which ones should be used l'katchila? What difference does it really make? If you can use Shem, then you can use Shem. That's the Rambam's kasha. Says the Rambam, Kidei leida yafa she'en l'mayla mimenu v'ashava v'apachas. The Torah wanted to give you a pecking order, so you should know what's the best, what's the next best, and then the third best, etc., etc. Why is that important? Because if somebody wants to be Zoicha, Yakuf Yitzrei Hara, V'yarchiv Yadai, V'yavi Karbonoi Min Hayafa, HaMeshubach B'yoysa Shaba'osa Amin Sheyava Mimeno. Because if a person wants to, L'shoinoi Hazav Shal HaRambam, Liskois Atzmoi, if somebody wants to, Liskois Atzmoi, I guess that's self-explanatory. Yakuf Yitzrei Hara, V'yarchiv Yadai, V'yavi karbonai, but don't just bring a carbon. It should be min hayafa. Hameshubach b'yoyser shaba'osa min. And says the Rambam, you know what Exhibit A for that is? This week's parasha. Harei nema b'Torah v'hevel gehevi gam hu mebchayre tzayna. Cain brought a carbon, and Hevel brought a carbon. Cain's carbon was a mincha. He brought from the tfuah that he was working. He worked the field, so he brought a mincha. Hevel had animals, and what did he bring? He brought mibchayre tzayna. But the Torah emphasizes umei chelveihem. What does chalveya mean? We just said what chelbay means. It means from the shufrei. Vayisha Hashem el hevel ve'en chasai. So it says the Rambam, you don't have to look any further than the first carbon that was ever brought, and that's the carbon of Cain and the carbon of Hevel. And the Torah goes out of its way to say that Hevel brought a carbon mei chelveim, and right afterwards Hashem listens. Hashem accepts Hevel's carbon, not Cain's. Cain gets jealous, and the rest is history. But the point is that you see there's an emphasis in the Torah that Hevel's carbon was accepted because he brought it Meichel Vein. And says the Rambam, V'hu adin l'chol davar, shul Hashem. Okay, this is not only true with regards to kachim, but it's true for everything. Shiyeh min hana hatoiv. Anytime you do a mitzvah, anytime you give anything to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it should be from your best. And bana beis tefillah, if you're going to build a shul, yeh na mi beis yeshivasa, it should be nicer than your house. Hechel ra'av, if you're going to feed somebody hungry, yachol min hatoiv v'hamasak you should give the ani the best food that you have. Kisa arum yechasim min hayafa shebeksusay. Hikdish davar yakdish min hayafa shebenechasav. V'chein hu oimer kol chelev Hashem. And that's how the Rambam ends his Hilchos Yisurim Mizbeach. And the Rambam is mavur that this idea of giving min hamufchar mikol chelba is not just halach and Trumas Meiser, and it's not just halach and kachim like you find by Cain and Hevel. And that pasuk that the Rambam quotes is kol chelev Hashem. That's a pasuk in kachim. It's not only true when it comes to inyane kachim. Hashem. But the Rambam's lashon is kol dover shehu l'Hashem hakel atoy. And the Rambam gives examples like building your shul and being meichel aniyim, being mechasa arumim. There's a maila to take your best and faket the best that you have. You should give for a mitzvah. And then afterwards, you should have anah from yourself. But there's a mitzvah, there's a maila. Just like the Levi took the te'enim and he gave that to the kohen and he kept the groigris for himself. Every person in his own avodas Hashem should take the best that he has, give that to Yenim, and everything else he should keep for himself. Today is the Heilige Chasam Sofer's yard site. So just to speak out, one Chasam Sofer, me'inyan le'inyan, the Chasam Sofer and his pirish on Avos, on the Mishnah, Yehi Beischa. Chasam Sofer didn't write a pirish on Avos. Chasam Sofer is in a drasha, but he's explaining a Mishnah in Avos. Yehi Beischa pasuach l'rvacha, v'yiyu aniyim b'nei Beischa. Says the Chasam Sofer, Yehi Beischa pasuach l'rvacha. A person should open up his house. It should be an open house. You should allow people in. You should give tzedakah. You should be mefarnes piyim. And even if it means that that your own family are going to be like aniyim. In other words, there's a maila to take the better and give that to the other people. Yehi beischa pasuach l'rvacha mitabreikait. When it comes to your own family, they could be a little bit humbler. But l'katchila, when it comes to the mitzvah should be min hayafa, the mitzvah should be mikol chelboy, it should be min ha'mufchar. Either way, we return to the topic of menachos. Ok the Mishnah, kol ha-menachos niloishois bepoishrin. So the first Mishnah in the parak began discussing a halacha of menachos. Are menachos ba'is matzah or are menachos ba'is chametz? And Mishnah said, kol menachos ba'is matzah. All menachos had to be matzah, chutz michametz shebetoida v'shtei halachem, with two exceptions. Some of the lachmi toida were leavened bread. The shtei halechem that was brought on Shavuos was also chametz. Incidentally, it sounds a little bit from the Mishnah like the shtei halechem was a mincha, right? Kol ha-menachos ba'is matzah, chutz michametz shebetoida v'shtei halechem. If shtei halechem is not a mincha, then it's not an exception to the rule of kol ha-menachos ba'is matzah. So it's mashma a little bit that the shtei halechem was a mincha, which incidentally is not so pasha. But either way, so the Mishnah said kol ha-menachos ba'is matzah, with the exception of the Zok the Mishnah. On that note, kol ha-menachos nidloishois be-poishrin. All the menachos were needed with poishrin, lukewarm water. So not too hot, not too cold. It was supposed to be lukewarm. Umeshamran, but it was important for the kohen that was doing the lisha to watch them very, very carefully. Shalayach mitzu, to make sure that it become chametz. Sounds familiar? When you bake matzahs, right? So it's a very similar idea. You had to watch it. There was a mitzvah of shmirah. If it became chametz, shiareh, over b'loisaseh. Even if the shirayim became chametz, there was a loisaseh. Meaning, that's pashit. What the Mishnah is suggesting is that the part of the mincha that was karev, the part of the mincha that went on the mizbeach, certainly wasn't allowed to become chametz. The Mishnah is saying a chiddush that even the shirayim, even the part of the mincha that was eaten by the kayanim, even that was not allowed to become chametz. And if it became chametz, is a loisaseh. Shenema, the pasuk says, kol ha-mincha asher takrivu l'Hashem loiseyaseh chametz. Thus, you see from here that the entire mincha is not allowed to become chametz. The Mishnah continues and says another halacha: v'chayev al ishasa v'al arichasa v'al afiyasa. So, if somebody would prepare the mincha and it would be chametz, he wouldn't just get malchus one time. Meaning, it's not just arbam chaser achas to mershdamo, but it would be tzimtzveitamo and tzimdritamo and tzimferdamo lochet. Right? You'd be chayev al alisha, on the aricha, on the afiyah, the different chashiv elements of the baking process would all beget their own set of malchus, and all of this will be discussed right now in great detail in the Gemara. Zok the Gemara Menani Mili. How do you know that not only can't the mincha be chametz, but even the shiorei ha-mincha can't become chametz? Now, the fact that the mincha itself can't become chametz, the Gemara doesn't say Menani Mili, it expects us to know that. You're not allowed to be makriv sar in the mizbeach. So no chametz on the mizbeach. That we know. The chiddush is that not only the chelik that went on the mizbeach wasn't allowed to be chametz, but even the chelik that went to the kayhanim, also known as the shiorei ha-mincha, the shirayim, even that wasn't allowed to be chametz. It says the Gemara, how do you know that? It says lo seyafe chametz chelkam. Afilu chelkam. Even their chelik. Who's chelik? The kohanim's chelik. The shiori amincha loy seyaf chametz. Feit the word b'hai lahachi uda asa. Hani boy loy look at the Tanya. Loy seyaf chametz. Matam loymar. Why does the Torah have to say loy seyaf chametz? V'aloy kfar nemar. The pasuk already says loy seyas chametz. You're not allowed to make chametz. Vishen aba loy seyas chametz. Yochel loy yechai v'lachas al kulam. From the pasuk loy seyas chametz. It's a very general pasuk. Don't make chametz. Okay, so I would think that if I made chametz, somebody took the carbon mincha and he allowed it to become chametz, so he would be chayav malchus for making chametz. And it doesn't matter if he did the lisha and the aricha and the afia. It's going to be one chametz because it's essentially one loisase of loiseyas chametz. Talmud loimed loiseyaf. So the Torah went ahead and singled out afia. Afia b'chal hoisa. Lama yatzis. Why did the Torah have to single out afia? Ma afia miyuchedesh imaisi yechidi v'chayav la b'fnei atzma. Just like afia is one part, albeit the most important part, but it's one part of the chametz making process. And you see the Torah said that for the afiyah itself, you're chayev malchus, afani, avi, lishasa, va'arichasa, v'chol ma'isi yechidi, and any other ma'isa, la'asuye. What's that other ma'isa? Kitov, smoothing out the dough. Point is, shu ma'isa yechidi v'chayev alem, b'fnei atzma. The point is that lo yiseyafa chametz is not an extra pasuk. Because had the Torah not said lo yiseyafa chametz, I would have thought that if somebody prepares chametz, he's chayev one malchus for the entire process of preparing the chametz. Kamash malon loiseyafe afia bechlal hoisa, to tell me that there's a special malchus for afia, but not only for afia, but for all the other parts of the process of making chametz. So if loiseyafe chametz is not extra, how could I darshan loiseyafe chametz chelkam to tell me that the iser of mincha chametz relates even to the shiarei mincha? The Gemara is assuming that the only way to make that drasha is if the pasuk lo yiseyafa chametz is extra, but it's not extra. It's a mefurish braysa. I needed to tell me that you're chayav an individual malchus for each detail of the process of making the mincha. Says the Gemara, no, not true. Anan michelkam kamrina. There's really two drashas that we can learn from the pasuk lo yiseyafa chametz chelkam. Number one, lo yiseyafa. Why does the Torah have to single out afia? Afia bechlal hoisa, to teach me that it's not just one malchus for the entire process of making the mincha, but for each individual chashuv, each ma'isi yechidi gets its own malchus. But the Torah also says chelkam, and chelkam teaches me something else. From the word chelkam, I know that the chelik of the kohanim you have chametz for as well. Freit the Gemara, ve'ema kuli lehachi udaasa. If that's the case, maybe the whole pasuk is coming to teach me one. How do I know two drashas? Meaning, how do you know two drushes? Says the Gemara, came lichtov chelkom loiseyafa chametz. My loiseyafa chametz chelkom shamet minat harti. Had the Torah said first chelkom and then loiseyafa, so I would say that the only thing I'm going to learn from here is that the shiari mincha is not allowed to be chametz. But from the fact that it said loiseyafa and that it said chelkom shamet minat harti, from loiseyafa I know that it's not one malchus for the entire asiyah, but each individual part of the process begets its own malchus. From the fact that the Torah used the word chelkom, I know that not only the part of the mincha that went on the mizbeach, but even the shiori mincha that was eaten by the kohanim, even that part has this halacha as well. So just before we go weiter, and the Gemara gets into the weeds of some of these drushes, so just to be a little bit clearer with the psukim. So there's really two psukim that this part of the daf is hinging on. The first is in Parshas Vayikra, very straightforward. Kol mincha asher takrivu l'Hashem lo yiseyasa chametz. Torah says, right after it introduces the concept of the carbon mincha, a mincha cannot be chametz. Ki chol sa'or v'chol devash lo yisaktiru mimenu isha l'Hashem. Straightforward. It's in Parshas Vayikra. It's Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Aleph. It's one pasuk. Kol mincha asher takrivu l'Hashem lo yiseyasa chametz. Very general. Ki chol sa'or v'chol devash lo yisaktiru mimenu isha l'Hashem. The second pasuk is in Parshas Tzav. It too is talking about the carbon mincha. And there the Torah says, Lo yiseyafe chametz chelkom nasati oisa me'ishoy kodesh kadasham hi kachatas v'ka'asham. So again, the Torah is talking about the mincha. V'zois Torah ha-mincha hakra v'oisa b'nei harim v'nei Hashem v'nei ha-mizbeach. Forward, Perek Vav Pasuk Yud, again, Lo Yiseyafa Chametz. So the Torah essentially mentioned it twice. The first time it spoke in more general terms, Lo Yiseyafa Chametz. The second time it says Lo Yiseyafa Chametz. But the first Pasuk and this is important for the next part of the daf, is in Parshas Vayikra. It's Vayikra Perek Beis. The second pasuk is in Parshas Tzav. It's Vayikra Perek Vav. The first pasuk says Lo Seyasa. The second pasuk says Lo Seyafa. It also says the word Chelkam, Shamet Minatarti. There were two things that we learned out from the second pasuk. Number one, a separate Malkus for Afiyah and Lisha and Aricha and Kituf. Additionally, Chelkam, the Shiori Mincha, there's going to be a Chi of Malkus for as well. Frek the Gemara, Kasha, the Ema Afiyah, the Parat, L'cha, L'chayev, Chada, Inuch, L'chayev, Chada, Akulu. How do you know, from the fact that the Torah singled out Afiyah, that what it means is that there's a separate Malkus for Afiyah, and there's also a separate Malkus for Lisha, Aricha, etc. Maybe only Afiyah that the Torah singled out has its separate Malkus, but everything else doesn't have its own Malkus. Says Gemara, what do you mean? I'll tell you how I know. Rabbi Shmuel Leimer, Mishum Dahav Davash Hoye B'chlal, V'yatzav and Aklal L'lamid, Lo L'lamid Alatzma Yatza, El L'lamid Alaklal Klo Yatza. That's one of the Yud Gimel Midai Shah Torah Nidreshes Ben. By the way, if you're keeping score at home, it's number 8. So the 8th of the Yud Gimel Midai Shah Torah Nidreshes Ben is Davash Hoye B'chlal, V'yatzav and Aklal L'lamid, Lo L'lamid Alatzma Yatza. Afiyah was B'chlal. It was B'chlal Le'siyasa Chametz. V'yatzav and Aklal, Lo L'lamid Alatzma Yatza, El L'lamid Alaklal Kula Yatza. Yeah, either way, so it's included. So says the Gemara. So therefore, I know that it's not only teaching me that there's a separate malchus for Afiyah, but that there's a separate malchus for each. But the Gemara says, Ve'ema, maybe look at it a little differently. Le'sasei klal, le'sei ofa prat, klalu prat, ein bechlal, ela masha beprat. Afiyah in, midi achrini loy. Right, the Gemara, how do you know that the way you look at le'sei asa and le'sei ofa is that Afiyah was a dovish hoyi b'chal v'yatzman aklal, elamid ala klal kula. Maybe look at it as le'sei as a klal, and leisiyafa as a prat, and klalu prat in bechlal alamasha beprat. And again, if you're keeping score at home, it's number 4 in Rabbi Yishmael's list of Yud Gimel Midah Shatar Nedrashas Behem, also known as klalu prat. So you have klalu prat, where the rule is ein bechlal ela masha beprat, and then there's a rule of davash ahaya bechlal v'yotzim v'nachal alami. So the Gemara is asking a specific kasha regarding leisiyas or leisiyaf. Leisiyas is a klal, or any part of the baking process of the mincha cannot be chametz. And then there's a prat, le'seyafa. So the Gemara says, really, any part is also. Not just that, Afiyah teaches me that for each individual part of the process is a separate malchus. Freit the Gemara, why? Because it's the 8th of the Yud Gimel Midah Shatar Nedrashas Ben. Maybe it's the 4th of the Yud Gimel Midah Shatar Nedrashas Ben. The 4th is klalu prat, in bechlal elamasha prat. And you know what? Maybe the Torah is telling me that only Afiyah is aser. Maybe there's no isser at all. Lisharich, forget about malchus. Not even aser. Because although it says loiseyasa chametz, which is very general, it's a klal, but there's also a prat of loiseyafa chametz. Now the truth is, this is a question every time you have a klal prat. Every time you have a klal prat. How do I know it's a klal prat? Maybe it's a davash hoya b'klal v'yatzim and a klal olamid, l'lamid alatzma yatza, elamid aklal kula yatza. Or in the reverse, every time I have a davash hoya b'klal, right, v'yatzim and a klal olamid, maybe it's really a klal prat. That's essentially the Gemara's question. It's a specific question regarding leisiyasa chametz and leisiyafa chametz. But if you think about it, it has global ramifications. And for the Gemara, Omar Rav Afturiki, Mishum dahavet klalu prat hamaruchakum zeh. This is the rule of thumb. V'chlal klalu prat hamaruchakum zeh ein doinu noisa v'chlal prat. You know when you say klalu prat? When the klal and the prat are next to each other. You know when you say davash ahaya b'chlal v'yatzman akal l'lamid ala klal kulay? That's if they're meruchakim zeh b'zeh. They're far from each other. In this case, the klal is loiseyasa chametz. That's Vayikra Perek Beis. It's in Parshas Vayikra. The prat is loiseyafa chametz. That's Vayikra Perek Vav. That's in Parshas Tzav. They're meruchakim zebezeh. They're 4 prakim away from each other. You literally have to wait for the next Kriyas HaTorah to even hear it. It's 2 different weeks, 2 parshas. Oh, they're meruchakim zebezeh. Over here, you don't look at it as a klal or prat. Rather, you look at it as a davash hoya b'chlav. And it says the Gemara, Masiv Rab Adu Barahava Gishmak V'amri Lo Kadi. We're about to digress. The klal prat hameruchakim zebezeh and doim noisa b'klal prat. Is that true? Is this a real rule that anytime you have a klal or prat next to each other, it's only then that you can say klal uprat. But if they're meruchakim, you can't say that. But time you learn to the brayso v'shachat oisay b'mokem asher yishachet esa oila lifnei Hashem. Chatasu. And the context of this pasuk is Vayikra Perek Dalid. It's talking about the carbon chatas, specifically the chatas nasi. So if the nasi did an avera b'shaygig, he had to bring a special type of
chatos. Says the Gemara, where did he bring the chatos? That's a pasuk in the Torah. V'shachat oisay b'mokim asher yishachet asa oil lefnei Hashem chatos. Says the Gemara, heichal oil nishchatos b'sofen havzeh b'tzof. Is this the Mekar? I need a pasuk regarding the chatas nasi to tell me that the chatas nasi had to be brought b'tzafin. There's a more general pasuk in Parshas Tzav, in the parsha of Zois Teras Achatos, and over there the Torah says, "B'makom asher tishachet ha'oila, tishachet achatos." So it says already that all chatos have to be b'makom asher yishachet ha'oila, which is tzafin. So why do I need a pasuk regarding the nasi to tell me that the nasi's chatos had to be b'tzafin? I know from Zois Teres Achatos and Parashas Tzav that all chatos had to be in tzafin. You know why the Torah singled it out by nasi? To teach me a rule regarding all chatos. To teach me that tzafin is not a din l'katchila. It's not preferable, but it's ma'akev. It's even b'di'evet. That when we say that a chatos has to be b'tzafin, it means it's ma'akiv if it's not going to be b'tzafin. Is that true? Maybe that's not true. Maybe you know why the Torah singled out that the chatas nasi has to be b'tzafin? To tell me that only the chatas nasi has to be b'tzafin. Meaning, don't make a mistake and think that when it says Zois Teres Achatos b'mokoim asher tishachet ha'oila tishachet achatos, it means that all the chatos have to be b'tzafin. No, the Torah singled out by the nasi to tell me that only the chatas nasi. Talmud Loimar says the Brisa that can't be. Meaning, even though it's an interesting havamina, I hear the Gemara says, but it's not true because there's another pasuk that says v'shachet as achatos b'mokim asher yishachet as ha'oila. There's a third pasuk, in other words, that's zebano of l'chol chatoy shatun esafin, and that teaches me that every single chatos needs to be b'tzafin. Says the Gemara. So again, what do we have? We have a brisa that essentially is puzzled by the fact that the Torah had to single out by the chatos nasi that it had to be b'tzafin. We know there were many different types of chatos. There was the paralam davashal tzibur, there were the paraman esrafim, the chatos apnimis, chatos chitzonius. They permeate so much of the lumdus and Masechtas Zvachim and Menachos. Not all chatos were created equally, and there's many parshiyos of chatos, as we're going to see a little bit now, into tomorrow's daf. Stating that the Torah, for some reason, singled out by the chatas nasi that this chatas has to be b'tzafin. And the Gemara is not sure why. If every chatas has to be b'tzafin, why does the Torah have to single out here? And the Gemara posited two suggestions. Number one, maybe because only the chatas nasi has to be b'tzafin. Meaning, even though there's a general pasuk, maybe the reason Torah singled out here is to tell me only here. Alternatively, maybe it's to teach me, it's a gilui on the parsha of Zois Teres Achatos to tell me that the din tzafin isn't only a din l'katchila, it's ma'akev. Says the Gemara, I know the right answer is choice B and not choice A. How do I know that? Because there's another pasuk that tells me that all chatos need tzafin. So obviously the pasuk of chatas nasi can't be coming to tell me that only the chatas nasi needs tzafin. Geshmak, says the Gemara as follows. Time of the kasar rachman b'shadas achatos. You see the Brisa entertained the possibility that when the Torah singled out tzafin by chatas nasi, maybe it was coming to tell me, it was only a havamid, it was a fleeting thought, but a thought nonetheless, that maybe the reason the Torah singled it out is to tell me, you hear what's going on, is to tell me that only the chatas nasi needs tzafin. And we need a pasuk to tell me that's not what it means. Because halav hachi havamid shezet ton tzafin, ve'nachat ton tzafin. Faith the Gemara, my timer. What's pshat in that havamina? Lav mishum. The only pshat I can think of, says the Gemara, is to have a klalu prat, because the parsha, the pasuk in Parashas Tzav that says Zois Teres Achatos b'mokim asher tishachet ha'oila tishachet achatos is a klal. Zois Teres Achatos, it's speaking in very general terms. And then when the Torah singles it out by the chatas nasi, it's a prat, and we know the rule: klalu prat ein b'chlal ala masha b'prat. So that must have been the havamina. The reason the Gemara even suggested that maybe by the Torah singling out tzavin by chatas nasi is to tell me that only the chatas nasi needs tzavin is probably based on klalu prat. What's the kasha? One is in Parashas Tzav and the other one's in Parashas Vayikra. So what do you see from here? That even a klala and a prat that are meruchakim zeh bezeh, you still can look at done and ois of a klala prat, and you don't say no, that's the eighth of the Yud Gimel Midah Sha'atar Nidreshes Behem. You can use it as the fourth of the Yud Gimel Midah Sha'atar Nidreshes Behem. Great kasha, but the Gemara says Maskefla Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi heard this conversation and he came with a tkifos. Right? Not all questions are the same. Maskefla. He was very angry. He said, "Hi, klalu pratu. What? You have a havamina? That's what the Brisa meant. This is not a klalu prat. You know what this is? This is a prat uklal. Which, by the way,
is another one of the Yud Gimel Mitzvah Shayter Nidreshes Behem. And when you have a prat to klal, you look at it differently. It's v'nasa klal moisef ala prat, v'israbi lu kol nili. Prat to klal is the antithesis of klal uprat. Klal uprat, all you have is the prat. Prat to klal, you have everything. The point is, if anything, there's a prat to klal. Because the prat is chatas nasi, which is in Parshas Vayikra. The klal is zois teres achatos, which is in Parshas Sav. So when the Bryce said a havamina, that maybe only the chatas nasi needs stuff, and it couldn't have been based on klal prat. Because it's not a klal prat, it's a prat to klal. And by the way, Rav Turiki is right. It wouldn't have been a klal prat anyways. Because it's miruchakim zebizah. What then was the havamina? Elatana oisei kakashale. Because the Torah uses the word oisei in the Parasha of chatas nasi. Oisei is a miyut. It's coming to exclude something. What's it coming to exclude? Maybe it's coming to exclude shezeh ton safun me'achar ton safun. The kasra rachmana oisei. That was the havamina. That maybe the word oisei in the parsha of the chatas nasi, which clearly is coming to exclude something. Perhaps Ulai argues the Braisa, it's coming to exclude all other chatais from Tzafin. But not that I would exclude others from Tzafin based on the midah of Klal Prat, because it's not a Klal Prat for two reasons. A, it's a Prat to Klal, and B, it's Miruchakim Zebezeh. The Havamina to exclude other chatais from the Din Tzafin would have been based on the Joshua of Oisai. Kamash Malon, that's not what Oisai is coming to be Mamayit. What then is Oisai coming to be Mamayit? That's going to be tomorrow's stuff. But for now, we will conclude this discussion and just end with one ha'ara. So we have an idea over here. Really, it's the theme at the beginning of the parak, although the Gemara digressed first with the daf of Haggadah, and then with the daf dealing with Kim Moshehain and Likim Moshehain, and another half of a digression today. But really, the topic of the parak is Kol HaMenachos Ba'is Matzah. And today we saw the psukim a little bit. So why can't a mincha be chametz? It's interesting. When you think of chametz, immediately, word association, Pesach, right? On Pesach, you're not allowed to have chametz. But really, a brisker should think of a mincha, right? Or at least also a mincha. Because the laws of chametz impact two sugis in Shas. Number one, Pesach. On Pesach, there's no chametz, karis, and number two, the carbon mincha. The carbon mincha was not allowed to be chametz. We had sugis of chametz noiksha, we didn't really go into it. But really, the sugis of chametz come up in two places in Shas. You have it in Masechtes Psachim, because on Pesach, no chametz, and you have it also in Masechtes Menachos, because a mincha was not allowed to have chametz either. So the question is why? Why can't, from a machshava, hashkafa, Kabbalah perspective, why was there not allowed to be kichol sa'ar b'chol devash loisaktiru mimenu ishal Hashem? The Baal HaTurim on this pasuk says one line: Lefishi Eitzahara doime l'sa'ar. The reason is because the Eitzahara is doime l'sa'ar. Umitam zeh gam kein hizer ala devash she'Eitzahara masuk la'adam. You want to know why no sa'ir and no dvash? Because sa'ir and dvash are symbolic, they represent the Yetzirah. The Yetzirah is called sa'ir, the Yetzirah is called dvash, and it's for that reason, says the Baal HaTurim, in a carbon mincha, you can't have sa'ir, you can't have dvash. Now, where do you find that the Yetzirah is referred to as sa'ir? So it's a Gemara, a well-known Gemara, a Gemara Masechtes Brachos, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, that's very often quoted. Rabbi Alexandri, Basar de Matzli Omar Hachi. Rabbi Alexandri, when he would finish his Shemona Esrei, after he would finish davening, so he had his own tefillah that he had composed that he would recite, and he would say as follows: Ribono Haolam, a beautiful tefillah. Kol v'yadu lefanecha sheritzaynenu lasos ritzayncha. You know, deep down in our hearts, we all want to do your ratzon. Umi ma'akev, but what's getting in the way? Sa'or shebe'isa v'shibud malchiyah. Zok Rashi, Sa'or shebe'isa yetzahara shebilvavenu hamachmitzenu yehi ratzon milfanecha shetatzilenu miyadam v'nashuv lasos chukei ritzaynecha b'leiv avshalom. That was Rabbi Alexandri's tefillah. He said, Ritzaynenu lasos ritzaynecha umi ma'akev. The Sar Shabisa. Who's the Sar Shabisa? Everybody knows. It's the Yetzirah, right? Sar Shabisa is the Yetzirah. Ayin ben Marsha, he explains why the Sar Shabisa is called the Yetzirah. Very nice Marsha here in Chedush Haggadah. But the bottom line is it's a Gemara in Masechtes Brachos. So you see that the Yetzirah is referred to as Sa'ar. The fact that the Yetzirah is called Devash, says the Baal HaTurim, Ayin Yerushalmi, Perik Yadalid, Halacha Gimel. But it's self-explanatory. The Yetzirah sometimes is Masuk La'adam Kedevash. Bottom line is Sa'ar and Devash represent the Yetzirah. Thus, when you bring the carbon mincha, you call sa'ar b'chol devash loisaktiru mimenu ishal Hashem. So it's a very profound balaturim, but it's also very subtle. If you take a look at Rabbeinu Bechaya brings the Ramazan of the balaturim, and he expounds on it a little bit. He says that the reason that a person would bring a carbon was for kapara, right? Most karbanos were brought for kapara. So you're bringing a carbon. The idea is that you're walking in and you're acknowledging that you were in the clutches of the Yetzer Hara, and now you're coming to do tshuva. You're coming to repent. A person that brought a carbon had to be misvada. That's literally chapter 1, verse 1 in the Rambam Silchas Tshuva. The Rambam starts in Silchas Tshuva the laws of vidoy, and he says every person that brought a carbon had to be misvada. That's the essence of vidoy, and every bal hakarbon had to make sure. Just to bring a carbon, that's when Hashem says Lama li roiv zevchechem. It came with a tshuva, and if it didn't come with tshuva, then to the contrary. So obviously, a person that's bringing a carbon is coming and he's saying that I understand that I was in the clutches of the Yetzer Hara, and I'm coming to do tshuva, aziv esachet, I'm going to remove myself from those clutches. So Hayitachin says Rabbeinu Bechaya that in your carbon, there are going to be these two ingredients that so represent what the Yetzer Hara is. Rabbeinu Bechaya says that the word devash and the word isha have the same gematria, and says, right, they both have a shin. One has an aleph and a hey, which is 6. The other one has a dalet and a beis, which is the same 6. Isha and devash have the same gematria. And says Rabbeinu Bechaya that sa'ar represents the Yetzer Hara of avodah zarah. Devash represents the Yetzer Hara of Arayas. The bottom line is Nafshin Shal Adam Mechamdasar or Misavasa. These two Yitzrei Hara have been the cause of man's downfall. Incidentally, I saw the Oznaim L'Torah, the Lutzker, he brings this Balaturim, the Rabbeinu Bechaya, and he's marchev on it. He says that Sa'ar was completely unallowed, right? Even the Shiorei HaMincha, we just learned the Mishnah, even the Shiorei HaMincha couldn't be Chametz. But Devash, you were allowed to put Devash in the Shiorei HaMincha. There's an idea of L'mashcha Kederech Shamalach HaMoichlin. He says because Arayas is something that's okay in moderation, right? You find a man's letter, Ish Ishtai and Kedoshim Tiyu, but even the Gemara says they tried being Mavatal the Yetzer Hara, the Arayas, and they couldn't be Mavatal it because they realized the world wouldn't be able to go on. The Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah, they were Mavatal Agamri, and he says that even if it would have meant that the world couldn't have gone on, so let the world not go on. Avodah Zarah is not okay even in moderation. But as it relates to Arayas, Ayin Sham, Dvarim the flow. But either way, regardless, says the Rabbeinu Bechaya, that's the significance. Sa'ar and Dvash both represent the Yetzer Hara. Sa'ar represents the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah. Dvash represents the Yetzer Hara of Arayas. Where do you see in Dvash Arayas? Dvash and Isha, 306, they both have the same exact gematria. That's the idea of Tichol Sa'ar v'chol Dvash.